It's whites only this week on Rune Soup. Welcoming to the show the astrologer and YouTuber extraordinaire, Cam White. No relation, but he does have the exact same name as my little brother. So it's a funny mix. But Cam, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me on, Gordon. I feel like it's been a long time coming.
I agree. Definitely. And well, I actually think, how old are you now?
I just turned 27 a couple months ago.
Okay, cool. So that means you are co-equal youngest guest, I think, that I've had on the show. I think 27 was the limit before. So I get to do a present tense version of the traditional first question. Are you a weird kid, Cam?
Am I a weird kid? That depends who you ask. To most, I probably would be weird. I'm an astrologer, and I'm like a guy that looks like the way that I do. But yeah, I would consider myself weird. Just depend. That's all on a spectrum.
All right. Okay. So how does one become an astrologer? If you look back at your childhood and think, did you grow up in a haunted house? Did you see aliens? Like, did you have an upbringing that would lead one to be a weird 27-year-old?
No, well, like I was really raised like non-denominational Christian. And it was mostly like the church that we'd go to was like ex-alcoholics, ex-prison people and stuff like that. And I felt a connection, but it made zero sense to me because for whatever reason, people in religious institutions do not want to explain things. And I love asking questions and I want to know all of this stuff. So as I got into high school, I was like really suicidal at some point. I was like really depressed. I was like going to homeschool and shit like that. And I got into like Wicca, like very, vanilla type Wicca. And the thing that called out to me the most was like the idea of the elements, like fire, earth, air. And so that eventually kind of led me to zodiac signs. And I was like, oh, like you're a Sag or whatever. So that means X, Y, and Z. It wasn't until about a year and a half later where I was at a party and someone was like, oh, what's your birthday? And I said, July 22nd. And they were like, oh, you're not like, they were like, what's your zodiac sign? Cancer. And they said, what's your birthday? July 22nd. And they said, oh, you're not a Cancer. You're a Cancer Leo cusp. And I was like, I don't even know what that is. So I researched that. And that led me to a birth chart. And for me, I am a huge geometry nerd. I'm a huge astronomy nerd. And just seeing like a spiritual map of like the stars of where I was born was just like instantly, hit all of my signals. And that was in 2014. It was actually when Jupiter conjoined my sun in my ninth house, which is really interesting. But that pretty much led me to where I'm at. Like I just discovered the birth chart, discovered meanings and stuff like that. And it wasn't, I think I started doing it professionally about 3 years after that. Probably about 2 or 3 years after that. Cause I just did nothing but study and research.
It's fun, right? Like, what I find funny about that is that it was a cusp conversation that got you into professional astrology, because that's like a term that is fraught in professional circles.
Well, the thing was that like, if you look at like a basic horoscope, it's like July 22nd is Cancer. And every time I read a Cancer horoscope, it was like, okay, I'm emotional, but I'm not that emotional. Like what? I don't know what this is. And I was trying to understand it. And so then when I found out I'm a cusp, I was born on a leap year. So technically I'm 0-degree Leo sun. And when I discovered that, I was like, oh, this makes so much more sense. And yes, it is super, everyone hates the whole cusp conversation. However, I do think it's one of those like like if someone who's been doing astrology for years is still talking about cusps, it's like, all right, they don't need to say that. But it is one of those little tiny things that can get someone into, like it can astrology pill them.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's funny what does it, right? So yours was a journey of self-discovery, like, oh shit, I'm in here. This is me. I found like there's something about this is kind of real that makes me want to pull further on it. And what was the first time, if you can remember it, that you saw either an astrology of a moment or an astrology of someone else's natal and said, oh wow, actually, yeah, there's something going on here that I want to pursue to the point that you've ended up doing it professionally?
That's a really good question. That's actually a difficult question because something I tell in my when I have clients that are like younger, that are like 18 to like 21. When I first got into astrology, I was looking at my chart and it's like, okay, this all makes sense, but some of it doesn't quote unquote resonate. And when you get into concepts like the natal promise, which is kind of like a very ancient, like, bedrock foundation of interpreting a chart, it's like, hey, all of this stuff is promised. It's just a matter of time as to when it happens. It took me like really around the time my dad was dying, which was, I was much older. I was like 23, and I already had a lot of, core concepts like to understand astrology. But that really unlocked a story in my chart that was there. It was promised, but I didn't make sense of it because it hadn't happened yet. And so that was when the absolute reality of it hit for me. And I think when we got into, it's one of those things where it's really easy to fundamentally understand like the text of astrology. Like, okay, sun rules Leo, moon rules Cancer, whatever. But it takes years, in my opinion, to like really see it play out. And I think COVID was probably the big thing that was like, holy shit, this is absolutely beyond real. Like, I already had that belief before, but it was kind of a lot of like picking at straws or, being very like getting into the weeds. But that was just like, boom, massive event on that Christmas eclipse in 2019. That was the first newspaper article of like weird new virus in Wuhan. And then March 2020 was the Mars-Saturn conjunction at 0 Aquarius lockdown. Like, separate yourself from society, which is so imprinted in there. And those events, and my dad died in 2019, and going through all of that, seeing how it was coming up in my chart, as well as those events, beforehand, I was like definitely a believer of astrology, but that rocked me to a different world. Like, it's hard to see that every astrologer knew something was going to go on in 2020. Not a lot of people knew what that was going to be. I didn't know what it was going to be. I was like, but something massive is going to happen. And then seeing something so globally huge play out completely just changed my perspective on how real it is. Like, I knew it was real before, but that's a different level of understanding the realness of it.
Yeah, I like that. And it's I think we'll jump into, this is the next topic area question of how you think it works, because what you're talking about there interests me. There are moments so I came to astrology via magic. Some people find out that the universe is magical via astrology, right? But people kind of end up in the same place, which is like, holy shit, all of this kind of shit is going on. One of the things that you can kind of tell if someone hasn't made it there yet is that astrology for them is like an HR quiz, where it can tell you something about your personality or your quirky little friends. And it can, right? And you see that, with astrology Twitter, it's like, oh, Mercury's doing this in my chart and I lost my pen. It's like, cool. But there's a leap that has to be made to realize, like, oh, this is saying something about the universe, right? This is that's a fundamentally different distinction, because then you have to go, well, it's saying something about me and it's saying something about the universe. So how are they in relation? Like, what's going on here, right? So when you see it play out in the world, it's a different discovery to realizing that astrology is some kind of true. It's like, oh, it is that, and it's also this other big kind of true. What do you think?
Well, to go to like your first question of like, how does astrology work? I have a lot of different frameworks for that. And again, it's all on a spectrum. My like absolute minimum belief is there is something God has with these planets, and they are telling some sort of a story. Now, whether we want to assign meaning to it or not is a different story. Like, I think at the minimum, it's space weather. Hey, would you maybe bring a jacket and boots with you if you knew it was going to snow? And how would your conditions of your life change if you were going to go out on an adventure and it was going to be snowing, but you didn't bring boots, you didn't bring, a jacket or anything? Like, how would you make the meaning of that significant? That's at the minimum. At the maximum, I don't know if you're into like electric universe theory or.
I am, actually, to be honest.
Okay.
But I'm certainly into the wrongness of
everything.
Of the ball of gas theory. Yeah.
Well, what I love about electric universe theory and Purple Dawn stuff is it was like the first time where it's like, oh, maybe the way I was taught how the solar system was formed actually doesn't make any fucking sense at all. And this actually can bring some, at least a better concept of how things, came together. At the maximum, my idea is I think everything is on frequencies. I think everything is on a wavelength. If you read Ptolemy's Tetrabiblos, Ptolemy would be the most based astrologer if he was alive today on Twitter, and he would rustle everyone's feathers because he has the funniest opinions if you read this book. Like, he's like, houses don't exist, but planets at a certain part of the sky matter. And so it's like, don't you mean houses? But it's really funny. But he talks about how it's, for example, when a planet is at the top of the sky, let's say on the midheaven, we are more exposed to that planet's energies versus when that planet is underneath the sky, the earth is protecting us from those energies. And the way I think of it is, I think of it as like, again, like frequencies and wavelength stuff, is that these are all, you know, if you get into chromatics, is that the word? Cymatics,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah,
That's how I think that the mechanism really is. Now, I don't, you know, I've been doing this for years. I've seen thousands of clients. I don't know if how much we have fate versus free will. That is a thing that is super hard to come together with, because the way I look at it is, you know, let's say you're having a transit in the next couple of years. That's going to happen no matter what. That's the context. Like, you know, it's going to be Saturn is going to go into Aries. It's going to enter your 7th house, or it's going to enter your 10th house. That context, no matter what you do, is going to happen. Why don't you set yourself up for a more preferred context for that? You know, for example, let's say it's a night chart, and so Saturn technically is a little bit more malefic. It's a little bit more problematic, and Saturn's going to go into your 10th house, and it's in Aries, for example. So it's not all that strong. Would you rather, you know, keep working your job and, you know, place a bet on you still being able to keep that job? Or would you rather, if you've had an idea to start your own business, would you rather make that the preferred context? So the way I kind of look at it is, we have a free will in terms of what context we want to set it up as, or what, you know, preferred situation. But I think how astrology plays out is, this context of events is going to happen no matter what you do. What situation or what situations can you get yourself into? And some of that is by fate, but some of that is by free will. And I don't know how much that's like, you know, it's all fate or all free will, or if it, you know, changes and fluctuates depending on the context. I think that's the fun part about astrology, though, is that you get to think about that question all of the time. But that's really the way that I see it happening, is that I think that there are, you know, for example, you know, bees don't do well with all the 5G stuff. Like, they act differently. I mean, for example, on eclipses, the animals act differently because you know, it's all of a sudden it's dark outside. So they start thinking, oh, it's dark outside. I need to start doing this, or I need to start changing my behavior. And, you know, eclipses are kind of a different example, but I think that there's a certain energy in the air that can affect how we, you know, react or how we respond, and we just may not know. It's the same thing when, you know, you're eating junk food all day and you're around all the blue light stuff. It's like, that's slowly making an effect on you, even if you can't put those pieces together. And how many decisions do you make in your life that could have been somewhat different if you were aware of all of the things that are influencing you?
Cool. I like that. So, and I like that there's like I don't want to say religious, but there's like a spiritual version of it, which is like, God or whatever has set these planets, or what we call planets, frequencies or beings in play, and we're underneath that. That's like an updated Greek version. And then there's the sciencey frame of that, which is, well, we're doing frequencies and wavelengths and cycles generally. Because I'm more or less there for both of them. Because what I want to know is, because I look at, I'm always very interested in how astrologers understand how other astrologies work. So the one that you're operating in is a Western astrological mode, and tropical for the most part, right? How does sidereal work? How does Mayan astrology work? How do ones that actually have different... Because I have this thing where it's like, is a blended cycle model. So I look at all these different cycles, and even economic ones like Kondratiev waves and so on. Like, are they true because astrology is true, or is astrology true because cycles are true, right? Like, which one do you stack to make the other one work? Like, is astrology a Greek, mostly Greek, but let's just go with that, Greek description of the cyclical nature of the universe, or is the universe cyclical because of astrology? And it's another one that I tend to go that the universe is cyclical and it's a Greek description of it. I tend to go in that direction, but I'm perfectly okay with it being the other one, because it kind of comes back to something is gained and something is lost with either of those descriptions. Right?
Yeah, there's all trade-offs.
And that's the same with like the free will or fate thing, and why it's not a question that astrology invites you to solve. It's a question that it invites you to sit with, because you learn, you get more of like, you get stoic medicine out of it being like, fuck it, it's all fate, because that's actually quite medicinal when you're trying to understand disappointment and pain and what have you. But if you need to be G'd up to go and do something, leaning more in the, I don't like the word free will, but leaning more in the agency direction really helps. So what I like about it as a framework is that it poses questions that aren't supposed to be answered, but sit with. So what do you think? Do you think it's like astrology works because of cycles, or cycles work because of astrology? Which one are you like 60-40 on?
That one, gosh, you're really hitting me with the big questions. Which I love. I don't get to talk about this all the time. I believe cycles are true, and I believe that's what makes astrology work. I also agree that astrology is a framework. I think at the very minimum, it allows you to ask the right questions for the right amount of time. It allows you a context, again, of like, for example, a major event happens in your life. You're going to see that in your chart. Do you have to ascribe the meaning to that? If you want to, that availability is there. Or can you just process that like, hey, this is a time for that? I believe that if you study any sort of history, history is cyclical. Everything in this lifetime, in this universe, is cyclical. Nothing is linear. And so I think because of that core concept, which I do believe is an absolute truth, things like astrology do work. And I think astrology is probably, and the way I think of it is environments. For example, there's micro environments. We think of a pond. There's like specific, algae and bacteria that work together. And depending on what you add in and take out, that environment's, life in that environment can change drastically. I look at astrology as this is the conditions, or these are the influences in our small little microcosm, which is our solar system. And, there's people like Dane Rudger that talk about like galactic astrology, and I'm really into kind of like if we were going to do astrology on Mars, let's say people eventually do make it to Mars, like what kind of framework would we go into where now Earth is a planet and Mars is not? On Mars, there's eclipses every fucking day because there's 2 moons. Uranus becomes a visible planet, maybe. How do you set up time zones to actually calculate a chart? Again, these are like really big questions. I think astrology is true because nature is cyclical. And I just look at the environments that we have. For example, what would life look like if there was a whole nother planet? Like, I don't know if you're into like the Planet X, Nibiru type shit. It's like all kind of concepts that when you're in like the conspiracy world, you kind of flow around and, discover, and you might ponder on a little bit. But what would another planet mean? How would the Greeks interpret that, or the Egyptians interpret that? Like, we all have these interpretations of what the planet means. And why I think astrology is true is, like, I'm a big person of like, I think astrology is an absolute science. I think if things like political science could be a science, or even psychology, which that's a big one people don't want to talk about. I think if those things could be labeled as science, astrology can, because every single culture on every single continent throughout every single time period has agreed the stars have something to say. What other things besides farming, hunting, fire do all cultures really agree upon on a certain core concept of their meaning of life? And it's not just, they have a religion or a deity or a god. It's like, no, they're specifically tracking the stars. They're specifically tracking the planets, and they're able to make predictions based off of those. So I just think that the astrology gives us the framework on how the cycles work. What gets a little bit weird is the time period we're in now. Like, when you start talking about, things, for example, when things get, drastic over here the next few years, it can be very minute, or it can all end in nuclear Armageddon. It's like, this is kind of a little bit different to interpret, because the context and what can happen and what can't happen is so wide now that it makes it much more hard to pinpoint exactly what would happen.
Yeah, that's true. All right. And I also like what you went there. So last year in Mexico at a conference, I gave a presentation that basically the one universal, well, there's a couple of them, but the core or key universal across all different kinds of astrologies, including very different ones like Mayan versus Hellenistic, is this idea of a human being in some kind of relation to the stars and posing a question at a time. And so it is a question-based coming into relation. That's the universal. What comes out of that is like meaning and movement. and that looks different depending on the system, but the action is the same. That's the action that's universal. And it's also because I opened the presentation by saying like, well, why do, because they do, different house systems work. Like if it was if like house systems were true, quote unquote, then one of them would be the most accurate and the other ones wouldn't work. Like if it was true, like electricity, it's like, does it work or not? It's a binary. But the reality is they not only all work, but in the one session, you can switch house systems and derive new insight. So we have to look for a mechanism of action that isn't in the system. It's in the ritual, the ceremony, the actual doing of like taking a moment, attending upon a moment of time and stars, using the tools that are available to us. And that for me has been the bit that like when I look for, that's what astrology is, and it works because the universe is cyclical, if that makes sense. Like the only thing we can say that's a universal for astrology for me is that it is a human coming into relation with the stars. Like that's what it is. And that looks different everywhere and is allowed to be different consequently, even in an individual session. Like you can switch it up and go Mayan, Vedic, Hellenistic in the one session, and the client or whoever can come away with like, wow, that was really powerful. And it is powerful. And they're not contradictory if you understand that you're operating at that level of basically a star ceremony.
Well, and so this is kind of like my favorite description of astrology is the divination of measurement. And I think when you absolutely put astrology in the framework of it is a map, there are many types of maps. They could all still map out the same land, but you can look at the topographical map. You can just look at a highway map. You can look at, you know, an environment, a big game map. They all show the same landscape, but they're going to show you different qualities of that landscape. And so that's why I think that framework, like that's why, and again, I think the other thing about house systems is like, and this is what I love about Ptolemy. He's like, that's stupid. Like, why would you try to like the sky in terms of like, if people aren't aware, the houses are how we place the planets in relation to the sky, not the zodiac. It's like the sky is so arbitrary. Where things, you know, what we do know is like the eastern horizon, the western horizon, and where planets culminate and then start to anti-culminate or deculminate. House systems get really into the weeds, and that's one of those things where I believe they need that nuance. But again, it's just another layer of mapping. And like again, I'm not the biggest Vedic person. I really know nothing besides about Mayan astrology. I know very, very little. But one thing that I do think is interesting is it's not only like a map, but you can think of it as a barometer, a thermometer. You could look at it as, what is the, humidity, or, there's a little tool in wildland firefighting where it shows you, like, it measures the temperature and the humidity, and it'll give you a percentage score of like how likely a wildfire is going to be on that day. It can show you, wind directions and how much wind is going to be there. And we're all navigating the same land, but we're all looking at different aspects of that land to get a interpretation of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's true. So you mentioned a couple of times, it was the Mars-Saturn conjunction that, because I mean, that was a horrific time for everyone, but that it brought you into a much bigger context of what astrology is, but also potentially, I would say, what your role is within it, in that classic Charles Eisenstein sense of what is mine to do. Because it's like, oh shit, I am a jobbing astrologer. It's people come to me with questions like, when should I get married? and you're looking at a very different, well, not very different, but what I'm very interested in for people who are professional fortune tellers is how they navigate what we can be, with a high degree of confidence, alarmed about what's coming, and people who come to us for our expertise, and they're looking at a world that they're either expecting to go back to a kind of Obama level normal, or at some stage, and it's like, do you shut your mouth and go, yeah, get married in the fall, but not in any of these places, and then just shut up? Because actually, if someone, probably not you, but if someone wants to make the case for that, to be honest, I can't argue with it. It's like, well, they asked me when I should get married. I don't need to tell them like World War III 2026,
Yeah. Well, and that's something I struggle with too, because so many people just want to live a normal life. And the problem with that is we have been absolutely coddled with such a privileged existence that humans have not seen for the past 80 years. We have not seen peace. We have not seen success. We have not seen stability, especially as Westerners and especially as Americans. So the concept that things could be bad is absolutely foreign to anybody here in America. So when you start saying like, hey, I don't know if it's the best time to like get your dual citizenship and start a life in France, like if you want, food and economic stability, they don't understand how to wrap their heads around that. And that's fine. But one of my jobs is to like, hey, if you're thinking about just because America sucks and you hate whatever, that you're just going to move to, Switzerland, your life's going to be great. It's like, well, let's think about that in context if you really want to get involved in like the geopolitical world. Now, what's interesting about relationships is I can't stand like, I can have my gripe with all types of like surfacey level astrologers, but there's this concept in astrology that's very popular. That's like, oh, is this my soulmate or is this my twin flame? Or, we have this synastry. Does that mean anything good or bad? And it's like, I have seen people with the absolute weirdest synastry, with the absolute weirdest placements that work well together. And I've also seen couples outlast horrible transits in their seventh house or whatever it was related to their context of relationships. And they went through it. And I've also seen people break up over Mercury retrograde. And this is where I get a little bit more in the free will part of it is like in terms of relationships, like I could tell you when is an astrologically favorable time to get married. But of course it's like, okay, are you willing to wait 10 years? Because there might be an amazing time in 10 years from now. Or you try, like I did a client not that long ago where he was like, I'm trying to get married in like a month from now. And so I was like, all right, here's an awesome time, like in a month from now. And I don't like sitting here and be like, oh, is this going to work out or not? I think the chart will tell some sort of truth for that. And my job as an astrologer is to get the most favorable chart to which it lasts or it works. But it's one of those things where, are you willing to make the relationship work? Are you willing to make the marriage work? We live in a society where people don't actually understand the concept of what marriage is. Like it's literally to death do us part. But nowadays it's kind of like we're committed until we're not. And that's where I think even just getting that part of it down is people don't understand what they're really getting into when it even comes to. And I used to DJ weddings. I've DJed like 300 weddings. Half of those people had no idea what they were getting into, and they just got married because their parents had a bunch of money and they wanted to get married. So, I don't necessarily go into it's kind of like, and my job too is luckily I've been, strong enough to be more vocal on my YouTube platform about how I see the world and how things are going, which has been very hard. I've lost a lot of friends because of it. I've lost a lot of followers because of it. However, as an astrologer, I got to call it as I see it. I can't lead people down a road that doesn't exist. That's going to be a dead end for them. And I can at least sit here and say, and nowadays, my clientele is pretty much on the same like spectrum of how I kind of view things. And it might vary either way. And maybe they don't even agree with me at certain times, but it's like, all I know is that this, when we start talking about World War III, something I think about all the time is like I'm really working on my music practice right now. And there's a part of me that's also very into prepper mode, like, wanting to buy land and live off grid. And the other part of me is like, I'm still going to do the things that I want to. However, because let's say World War III comes, knocking on our door. World War II looked different because we hadn't yet experienced the economic boom that we did. We actually just got done with the Great Depression, and the 30s, sucked ass. What does a world war look like today when people are making TikToks? Like is everything just going to stop? And we look at history as if like, oh, it was just World War II that was going on. And that might've been true for Europe, but it was not true for here in America. Sure. A lot of people got drafted and, the whole military industrial complex kind of got formed and, people started working for the military, women started going to the workplace and stuff like that. But is that going to be true this time around? And so that's where I kind of sit back and forth and going like, okay, what does a World War III even look like? Are people still going to be able to go to their Whole Foods, make their silly TikToks and work for their software tech company that, is more or less doing kind of like, nothing, but they could still pay their bills? That's the question I can't answer. And I think it's a safer bet to keep living as if those things are true, but understand you want to put yourself in the most, like what are the basic bare bones fundamental things that every human could agree on? Like, having like a sustainable lifestyle, being more in control of your life, meaning whether that is starting your own business. And, I think that's truly one of the only ways to freedom is not being under, the button of a corporate, overlord sort of a sense, starting your own business, doing more things locally, and still acting as if everything's going to be fine, because I don't see, like, TikTok's not going to go away. People are just making so much money doing all these types of things that I fail to see how it's going to go away, even in an economic, like, downturn. The economy and society is weird right now, and how much you want to just bet it's all going to end, and so let me just live, completely off grid, in my little cabin in the woods. It's like, well, that's also a fair bet too. I think people should consider that more and prep as if, like, hey, maybe not everything that's in your world today will exist later on, but also still, because I think operating in the sense that everything will somewhat continue, although it will be weird, is a way of putting faith in the good.
Yeah. So I've been sitting with, it's funny you mentioned, like, there's a saying in military strategy, like, generals are always fighting the last war. And that's the same for people who are responding to it. Talking of, say, March 2020, it was really fun watching people attempt a panicked version, and I really like the word prepping, of picturing a societal collapse where they're laying in, like, staples. Like, what are you going to do? You're going to, like, get a pail and go down to the old mill, or, like, go down to the local dairy and get your raw milk. Like, you live in Brooklyn. Like, it's not the things that are going away. It was really fun to watch people revert to, like, a previous emergency when there weren't things like ultra processed food and Uber Eats and whatever. Like, it was really fun. And I think one of the questions I want to pose is, like, what is an apocalypse for? Because there's like a stoic angle to it where, for me, as far as I can tell, an apocalypse is it's bringing forward the reminder that you are actually going to die, right? Because it's giving you a window of time where, well, like, shit, you might get bombed. You might get bombed in that 2026 to 27 and it'll be all over. But the thing is, you could die before that. You could die today, Cam. Like, but we don't think like that very often. And I know we both like Alex Hormozy, and
I love that,
like,
you like Alex Hormozy. That's so funny to me.
and he's got this thing where he's like, well, actually, one of the frames you can use when you're planning is like, well, what if you were never going to die? Like, and that's from a business strategy perspective, because rather than going fast, like building slow and not so much building slow, but getting the fundamentals right and growing, what could you do over a longer time horizon than, especially Americans are typically used to, a sense of immediacy. And I sit with that and I think he's right. Like, but there's the other side of it. And so I sit with, what would happen? You want to think, like, what would happen if I'm going to live forever, but also what would happen if I'm going to die tomorrow? And for me, like, an apocalypse is an opportunity to make sure whatever you're doing counts. And if you're in a job you don't like, that's fine. You can commit to, that's when you want to lean on the Alex Hormozy thing and say, right, well, I'm going to transition out of this, however fast that happens to be. But you should do it, because the space weather for the rest of the decade has some really nuts parts of it that we're all going to have to go through. And that's where I think I'm very interested in that. Like, what do we do with an apocalypse? What are they for? And I think it's like bringing forward a reminder that you're going to die. And this is why this episode is like white pilling the apocalypse, because I do think, and more people, I know, because I do my 6-monthly show with Austin, and the last couple of times he's like, it's not going to be World War III. Haven't asked him yet, because I'll save that for the surprise in December. I want to see if he's changed his mind on that over the last few months, whether we will allow the brand of World War to descend upon what's going to happen in the middle of the decade. Because I still think it will. But that, funnily enough, I think that just makes what you said more alive rather than less alive, which is like, cool. Well, it's a reminder that you literally might die. And the thing to do is not to gnash your teeth and wail and get upset about that, as much as, like, take that knowledge in, put on the big boy pants and find out what it is, what's yours to do, what you want to do, what you came here to do. And that, for me, I don't know. What do you think? Apocalypse as bringing forward a death reminder. I think what do you think?
In terms of the death part of it, in, like, comparing Alex Hormozy, it's like, what if you were doing if you weren't going to die versus what would you be doing if you were going to die tomorrow? My motto since I've been 18, and the reason why I like, people on my channel know I talk a lot about my music because I've putting so much fucking work and effort into it. It's all I've done my whole life. Astrology has been like a side quest that my life has taken, which has been very fun. But the reason I've taken astrology so seriously and everything else is, when I'm on my deathbed, if I am lucky enough to be there rather than just like blow up in a missile or something like that, what do I want to like? Do I want to sit there and say, I gave it my all for everything that I did? Or did I go, fuck, I didn't do those things that I wanted to do and I'm never going to know? And for me, I don't live with the idea that I'm going to die tomorrow. I live with the idea I'm going to die. And what are my last thoughts going to be? I've experienced a lot of death in my family and just in death in general, that a lot of people like, there's a lot of people I know that've never experienced like a personal death. And it's a rite of passage, in my opinion, to like go through that and to give yourself that context. But even in American society, like we're so detached from death, which is super weird, given America's chart. But I look at it as, you are going to die one day. What are you going to live for? What are the things that your heart of hearts tells you that you need and that you must do, and that would be agony if you didn't get done? And it's so easy to live in this world, not take action on those things, because the world says like, no, you're not good enough, or even your own inner voice says, no, you're not good enough, or no, you can't do it. But it's like, there's so many people that are doing it. What makes you different? What makes you special? As if you're better than somebody else, or that you're worse than somebody else. And so what do I think of an apocalypse is for? I struggle attaching meaning to it versus just going back into the cycles. Like, death is a natural part of life. And if you put that out into the macrocosm, well, then there must be natural parts of mass death. And the way I also look at it is, if we swing towards a very big era of peace, since relatively after World War II, more so after Vietnam, if we've been in this era of peace, then we must see an era of destruction and decay. And I think it's the same thing. It's like, you want the bad days so you can understand what the good days are for. Does that make sense? And so I think it is for us to be like, hey, because this is the thing, seeing all this stuff in the astrology and seeing the world has made me take current reality so much more serious and not for granted. And it's made me more grateful. It's made me more hopeful and faithful, but it's allowed me to take a step back and say, like, where am I taking this for granted? Are people taking their own lives for granted and not acting on anything because there's no real pressure, and they're kind of comfy where they are? Like, I feel like that's taking your situation for granted. It's like, you may not get that tomorrow. Tomorrow there might be, sleeper cells coming from, the Mexican border, and all of a sudden all this terror stuff starts, and then you may not have a meal. And so how can you look at your situation now and look how blessed you are and say, like, because I'm so blessed, because I'm so privileged, because I'm so grateful for this, like, it is my duty and it is my right, it is my obligation to take what is in my soul and expel it into the universe. Like, I think it is the most selfish thing when people do not act on their own inner dreams, because, like, the world needs that. The world wants that, and you are sitting here saying that you're not good enough or that you can't, and I think it's selfish. I think the most selfless thing to do is to take your dreams, your hopes, and your aspirations and to act upon them, because that you clearly have a need to put them out there, and the world has a need for those things.
We do a lot of desire work in the membership, but there's a big chunk of it at the beginning of the Wealth Magic course, and one of the frames for that is the expression of your desire is the cosmos itself choosing to do something through you. And getting in the way of that is, and I mean this, it's an affront to God. Like, the creation is seeking to express something through you. And obviously you hear people go, well, what if I'm like a fucking pedophile? And it's like, come with me on this. Let's do this glass half full. Don't be a dick, right?
Well,
like,
yeah. Is God telling you to smoke meth all day? Is God telling you to go like murder innocent, civilians or something like that? It's like, no, that's not what God is saying.
No, and it's one of the things that gets in the way of that is trauma, which is expressed in substance abuse and whatever, right? So it's like, no, as a matter of fact, what you were called to do is heal through that trauma to clear the channel for that expression. So, like, I think there's quite a number of slashers when it comes to astrology and music, because it's the same thing, right? Like, you are a wind instrument for the cosmos, for the actual cycles, one way or the other, right? Because that's what music is. Music is the same thing. It's the harmonic or frequencies of the cosmos, and so is astrology. So in both cases, it's like sound waves hitting you and coming out as music, right? Like, astrology and music are very are similar things. They're a surface that the waves of the cosmos hit that comes out of something. And I think there's actually quite a high degree of overlap between people who are musically inclined and end up having a talent for astrology, because it's just it is to reduce it, but like it's you're dealing with frequencies and harmonics one way or the other, and like listening to frequencies and harmonics that aren't actually audible yet, and then making them audible. Like you are literally
Yet
using
is the
it.
key
Yeah,
word for that.
yeah,
Well, because
exactly.
I mean, my big opinion too is I think if more numbnut scientists actually like my whole where I've taken my meaning and significance of doing astrology is I think I'm a palatable source for more people that are skeptical of astrology to at least consider it. And I think if more scientists and more researchers, just because every scientist, it doesn't matter if it's Neil deGrasse Tyson, I can debate any scientist because they have zero actual good, like, oh, like, you know, I saw an article, it's like, oh, astrology doesn't exist, we proved it. And it's like, well, that's not how actual science works. They have this concept of like astrology can't be real and there doesn't need to be science to prove that it isn't real. And I think if people took off that cap and just got more open-minded, there's the tests and the money and the funding and how to figure that out is all there. And so when you say like it's not audible yet, I think it would be audible one day, but we're just not listening for it. It's the same thing. It's like, you know, I try to tell people, you could say this too about the inoculations, but it's like, you know, there was lead in the gasoline. And no one really questioned that. And then all of a sudden we did all these things to ban the lead in the gasoline. I think about that with 5G stuff too. It's like, sure, you might think we're crazy people right now because we think that the frequencies that are clearly affecting the bees and the birds might have an effect on us. But, you know, let's see in a couple years. But are you just paying attention to it? Like, do you have the mind open enough to maybe look at that and see something a little bit different?
I don't know if people, maybe it's a trauma thing that a lot of people don't seem to be able to, because the astounding, you mentioned the inoculations. Obviously, I'm in Australia and I spend a lot of time in New Zealand every couple of months. And these are the two countries that are amongst the highest all-cause mortality rises following the inoculations or the injections. And my friends, the people I talk to are more on our level, obviously, but the general discourse seems like utterly unaware of it. Like, I had one moment in New Zealand where a former colleague, she was really, she took a bunch of the injections and she came over to visit a mutual friend who just had a baby. And she'd just come from a funeral. And she said, like, I just feel like there's so much sickness and dying at the moment. And me and the friend are on our level, and we're just like,
Weird.
there's like, because we're kind of a little bit past. This comes back to how we do fortune telling in this moment. And I think you're right. It's the same for me with the healing clients. Like, it's a bit self-selecting at this point, that even if people aren't in full agreement with us, they know to expect that we're going to come at our predictions from a particular perspective. And like, you can have it or not, but that's what you're going to get from us versus someone else. But like, there's no point. This mutual friend, one, she just come from a funeral, so now's not a great time to be like, let's have a fucking argument about what New Zealand did over the last 3 years. But also, it's just not going to work. Like, she's going to have to come to that if it hasn't landed yet.
I think people are like, I've had quite a few clients recently. Like, I have one client who is very, very left, like vehemently. She has a child who had to go to a university, had to take boosters and all that, and got myocarditis. And there's still a cognitive dissonance there, but there's a level of what's like something is like she wants to connect dots there. And I just had a client not that long ago from, you know, down south in Australia. Like, there's so many people that are noticing changes in their body because of that, and they're jumping to the correct conclusion, which is, well, I did take that foreign thing. And what I'm seeing more so is the people that weren't really like, I love, you know, big medicine and, you know, government corruption and fascist policies. It's the people that were like, oh, I'm just, you know, not thinking much of it, who they're being more open-minded to it. And it's the same thing. Well, this is the same thing with like war and stuff like that. Like, what's so frustrating about the, you know, Ukraine Russia thing, same thing with the Israel Palestine thing. And I know, like, we got to actually I just watched a video about this where the guy couldn't even say the terror because they're being censored. But when you pick these sides, like, you're going to understand one day, like, possibly when a missile blows up in your face or like whatever ends up happening, that maybe being tribalistic about things as such as like modern conflict are it's a byproduct of just being in such a privileged place. Of course you could choose the side of who's more deserving of death in a war. Of course you can. But I think people who I think the inoculations are a good example of people who have gotten a taste of reality of what that is, are starting to actually maybe take a step back and say, oh, maybe, you know, that experience can influence a decision later on in a very similar context where it's like, hey, maybe we shouldn't inject the world with an experimental thing that is proven to not work time and time again. And, you know, rather than taking that and just throwing it away, being like, I was affected by that, maybe I could see something different. It's the same thing with, like, you know, like inflation. It's the same thing with any situation. There's going to be a point where people see the reality of it, and it's not going to be the absolute deniers. Like, there's people that will always live in that bubble. Even, you know, there's still people in, you know, Eastern Europe and Russia that still think Stalin is amazing and great. And there's other people that are like, that was so fucked up. I can't believe I believed in these concepts.
Yeah. That's that Matthias Desmond thing. I got to interview him the other month. And there's this 30% that for their own trauma will never operate outside of official reality because it's too painful to do so. And then there's the 30% at the other end that are like us, but also all kinds of crazy, like different kinds of crazy, nothing in common except rejection of officialdom. And then there's that middle 60%, give or take, that swings. And I do think it's swung back. The beginning of the year, when the Denny Rancourt and Ed Dowd data was coming out about, Ed Dowd's book had just come out about the all-cause mortality rise everywhere. And Catherine Austin Fitz, because I'm a Solari member, was saying they were discussing a poll where 49% of Americans know someone who have been killed or injured by the injections. And she said, posed the question, what happens when that gets to 80? And I don't think it's that far off now. I think it's probably about, and if we look at the Armstrong model, for instance, we have rising civil unrest going through all of next year and into like which we're about to talk about, the interesting middle, late decade weather. I think at least part of that is going to be that. And even if it's not rationally that, we're at this stage, the energy in the West is a growing understanding that something really, really bad has happened, and still a social stigma around expressing it. That is a recipe for boom. That is a recipe for people. And you just kind of see, especially in the US, because you just kind of see the instances of random rage that you end up watching videos of, like big fights in a fucking Arby's or whatever. That's like, this didn't used to happen. And that's this tension point. And to say nothing of the fact that on a cosmic level and also a political action level, we are being forced into division to create this this unrest, right? So what's going on in the Middle East is in the process of coming home to areas where there are like mixed populations, and that's only going to escalate. So you look at it and go, well, this is a fucking mess. But I'm really interested in the energy or the realization, because this moves into, I want to talk about the Barbault Basket in 2026. Looking at it from a few years ago, we might have assumed that like, oh, well, we'll be done with the dystopia and then get to the utopia. But actually, it looks like the utopia is going to grow up underneath the dystopia, for like, is a better way of thinking about it, right? So there's all this growing awareness and understanding that is happening and connecting in a very like mycelial, rhizomal way underneath what is still a surface or superstructure of tyranny and dystopia. And that is obviously going to end up, because we can feel that in the energy, I suppose, breaking through in some random and hectic ways. And for me, that's one of the frames I'm sitting with for the rising civil unrest around the world, the Western world in particular, is it's going to suck, but it's actually, we can put a positive frame on it of like, this is a necessary breaking up of the tyrannical conditions to allow for better things to subsequently grow. And this is like, I want to talk now as we move into it. I'll get your take on that as we move into, in particular, 2026 and what you're looking at and what you think is going to happen. Because what struck me about, and I think S.J. Anderson was the one who came up with Barbault Basket, which I love. But it was Dan Waits and S.J. Anderson discussing this idea, and it's very French. We've had this discussion privately of like this utopia, this like very French techno-socialist utopia possibly arising in like, or ringing the bell for it in July of 2026. And it's funny, like that's going to be a kind of right, as far as I can tell. But it's not going to look like that if it's not going to look like that because it's going to look like fucking war and digital currencies and so on. But it's more, we can feel building the human connections now in what that's going to look like in say 15 years time. So what do you think to that? What do you think to that and the ways into the space where you've been looking at in the middle of the decade?
So I wanted to just comment on what you said about like people just being angry and things blowing up. And it reminds me of I don't know what the word is for it in like therapy, but it's like like I think of a trauma breakthrough where it's like someone has to, you know, for example, like I've done a lot of personal development seminar stuff, and we did one I talk about all the time on my channel called PLD. It was like a 90-day what they call game. You work with like 25 people, you set all of these goals, and like you are forced to hit the goals. But one of the things that you start off with is a contract. The contract is given to you, and the contract is an affirmation. Like my contract was, and I was like 19 and poor as fuck at this time. My contract was, I am a wealthy, trusting, focused man, actively contributing my valuable self to the world now. That was bestowed upon me before I did any of the stuff that, you know, I'm doing now, which like my contract super just aligns up with my life at the moment, which is interesting. But there was a woman who was at the time my not a mother-in-law, she's my sister's fiance's mom. And she had one that was like, I am a, you know, trusting, beautiful, loving woman surrendering to my heart's desires now, or something like that. And I mean, she flipped the fuck out. I mean, she had this conniption fit and just resisted, and she yelled, she screamed, she cried. She's like, no, that's not me. No, that isn't. And it took this breakdown for her to actually allow that to even be real. And that's how I kind of look at what's going on right now with people, is like, we're in this state of, you know, we cannot bend anymore. There's going to be a snapping moment at some point here. In order to, you know, this is where I do love the spiritual astrology girlies that are like, we are ascending into the 5D. I know that they've been saying that for like 10 years now, but there is something about, if you want to grow, there is something that you have to get through. So my issue with the Barbault Basket and it just being, you know, this like utopia stuff is every other indicator would say that's probably not going to happen. I also would say that just because it's a sunny day, sunny days are also good for launching wars.
Yes, exactly.
September 11th was a beautiful morning.
Yeah.
It's hard for me to see that, but this is where I come back to World War III is not going to look like World War II. And I have two reasons for that. One, and this is something I'm probably going to start talking more about just because I just saw something that just made me go like, I need to talk about this now. So the reason why I believe that there's going to be some sort of American divorce breakup, I don't know if it's going to be a civil war because most people are kind of anti-government, and I just don't imagine troops storming down, you know, their neighbor's driveway. But
well, it's easier to game out than that. Like the majority of enlisted troops come from the South, and it's going to be the Washington establishment trying to lasso states like Florida and Texas back in. And it's like you're going to get the Texans to invade Texas.
It's not going to, you know, and they wouldn't even do California. You could sit here and they can hate California and New York's politics, but they're not going to do that. But
exactly,
a big reason the Civil War ended was the day the Civil War started in America was the day Neptune ingressed into Aries, which I find fascinating, which the first ingress happens March, April 2025. There's a lot of things, like a lot of people keep saying World War III 2026. I'm looking at spring of 2025 as like there's way too much going on in one part of the sky where we're at least going to see something major happening. But a big reason the Civil War ended when it did was because the photograph was invented, and people for the first time started seeing pictures of dead bodies in their newspaper. And these are like people, like their other states, their brothers and their sisters, and being like, what the fuck is this? Like, this needs to stop immediately. The other day, I saw an Instagram reel of a complete fake car bomb, all made with AI, and the guy who was voicing it was also AI. I don't know whether to take the black pill or the white pill on Neptune and Aries and war AI generated content. Whether it's going to be, my white pill is it's going to be so bad and no one will be able to trust anything that they're seeing, that they're just gonna be like, why are we in this war in the first place? It's all propaganda, let's just stop. Or the black pill is like, if 9/11 happened today, 9/11 wouldn't need to happen. All what would need to happen is someone create it on a video and make fake phone videos as if it happened, and then, you know, they could have just exploded it, you know, like detonated. A plane didn't actually have to fly into it. And where I get scared is, scared isn't the right word. Where I get skeptical is, if Neptune is going to Aries, and Neptune is literally media, and it's going to the sign of war for the next, what, like 15 years, how is that going to change the trajectory of what all this war stuff looks like? And then we don't even get into Uranus and Gemini, which the last two times Uranus and Gemini was, the last time was World War II, and the time before that was the American Civil War. So at the very minimum, something's going on here in America. The other thing is, Saturn and Aries is not my, I mean, I have Saturn Aries. I genuinely enjoy it, but this idea that like, oh, because everything's trining and, you know, making that kind of like grand kite kind of an aspect, that's all going to be good. It's like, I don't know. A few things need to happen first. One thing that I can see happening sometime between spring of 25 and 26 is Putin dying. Now, me and you both know that, because he's got a Saturn-Neptune conjunction. If people don't know, Russian Revolution, 1917, Saturn-Neptune conjunction. Stalin dying, 1953, Saturn-Neptune conjunction. USSR collapsing, 1989, Saturn-Neptune conjunction. The Saturn-Neptune conjunction is something with Russia. That is just, we have 3 past events where it's on the fucking day. So, and also Putin has a Saturn-Neptune conjunction in his chart. So does Xi Jinping, which I just discovered recently. But my only issue is, if he dies, who's going to replace him? And me and you are both kind of in agreement that like they're much more neocon warhawk type people. Yeah. I don't know how far that goes though. So if he dies, and then from what I understand about Xi Jinping, I go back and forth whether or not he's going to invade Taiwan. It makes 0 sense, and it does at the same time. Like, people are like, but that's why it makes no sense. Like, that's why it makes sense. It's because it doesn't make sense, and it's just a way to grasp onto power and to configure everything into where at least China doesn't, you know, die a, you know, small insignificant death. They can like be the martyrs of their own story and everything like that. So I go back and forth of whether or not that's going to happen. But the 3 things that need to happen is either the Russia-Ukraine conflict has to come to an end, or NATO's going to get involved. Also, the whole Israel-Palestine thing, I fail to see how it's not going to involve a greater war. And again, what's frustrating about here, Americans, boy, the anti-censorship side is very pro-censorship nowadays, which is just like, oh, right when I was starting to feel a little comfortable over there, I'm like, just okay, now we're not doing this anymore. The war machine is what controls everything, and they want war no matter what the cost. And so that is the most momentous object going on in the energy right now. That is the momentum that they want to create. Like, it was like after 9/11, I don't know if you've seen the video of, I forgot who it was, some military guy, but he's like, we're invading one country, or it's either Libya, Iraq, Afghanistan, or Iran, or Syria. Like, pick your fucking, you know, which one you want to do. We're occupying Syria. We're literally building a military base in Syria, which is so convenient that now we're being attacked in Syria. Like, oh, how did we not see that coming? My problem with the Barbault Basket is the kind of story that is all peaceful doesn't line up with any part of history, and it doesn't make sense given that we technically just ended that. And if you see one hot war going on, we see another hot war going on. Everyone's kind of crossing their fingers for China, Taiwan. I'm still skeptical of whether or not that's even going to happen. Although it wouldn't surprise me. It's just one of those things that it's like, again, there's no actual reason to do it yet. For it making no sense is what makes it make sense. But going back to, like I said, World War III is going to look different. I don't necessarily know if that means, you know, we're going to be, Rosie the Riveter is going to come back, and, you know, we're just this military economy now. This war is going to be fought through, you know, propaganda. It's going to be fought through drones. It's going to be fought through ICBMs. How much soldiers are involved with it, I don't know. I think that's where World War I was funny, because we had all of this technology that we just invented, and we wanted to fucking use it on people. That is the same period that we are right now. It's like, and also World War I was a Saturn-Neptune conjunction. And so like, that was actually when America was like 1917. So there's that also similar quality that happens. And that's the big thing I'm looking at, is the Saturn-Neptune conjunction as the marker for that. Also, the reason I'm looking at the spring of 2025 and not 2026 is because from November of 24, we have from November of 24 to July of 2025, every single major planet ingresses into a new sign. Pluto moves into Aquarius and stays there. Neptune moves into Aries. Uranus moves into Gemini. Saturn moves into Aries. Jupiter moves into Cancer. Like there's too much significant changes going on 2025 for me to say that, no, it's the next year after that.
No, agreed. Yeah.
But
So that aligns with the Armstrong model more. Like it'll be obvious. So the war is several years. It's like 2025 to 2027. It's just that it's funny the Barbault Basket's in the middle of it in that model, but it will be obvious. It's obvious now it's going to happen, but you, in theory, because I mentioned this on your show, you in theory have an election next November.
In theory, correct.
You're not gonna, like, if it happens, it will be even more of a farce than Americans are now used to, which is another thing that used to be like, oh, you can't say that. That's like some sort of fringe idea. And it's like literally the 78% of Republicans think the last one was dodgy, which makes sense. But about 50% of Democrats also think the last one was dodgy, which means actually the biggest vote in the last election was for this election is dodgy, right? You literally add them up together and go, the majority of Americans who vote are aware that last time wasn't up to code. And that's going to look all above board compared to what happens. I agree, like when you're talking about there's a fundamental step change in reality that will be obvious from November moving through there. And it's plainly implicated in American geopolitics, which means it will be part of the story of why if you get an election, it'll be nonsense or you won't have one because of whatever, right? Like,
well, and so many people,
we don't have to wait to 2026 for sure.
Yeah, so many people in America too are like, no, we wouldn't stop the election because of a war. We've never done that. I'm like, but it's 2023. And also we're doing a lot of things we would never do. By the way, Congress isn't voting for troops to be sent out to, Israel, but that's happening anyway. We didn't vote on Congress for troops to be occupying Syria. We still have troops in Iraq. No one voted for that. So the thing, and also too, FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, had 4. He was in president for 4 terms, which is literally against, like, I don't think it's against the Constitution, but it's not how things work out. So those rules can be manipulated and changed. I go back and forth.
But you have one, right? Like, so the 2 most popular candidates on either side are obviously Trump on the Republican side and RFK Jr. on the Democrat side. And it looks like even if you have one, neither of them will be on the ticket. So it's like, what are you, even if you did have one, you still haven't. You know what I mean?
No, not at all. I mean, like, my whole theory is I predicted Biden was going to die in July of 22. I got that wrong, but the day I predicted it, he got COVID. So I'm a little proud of like, well, there's something on that day. It was like Mars hitting his moon in the 6th house that was activated. I'm looking at next April of 24 because it's a Mars-Saturn conjunction, Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, a great American eclipse over the border. Because that's the whole other thing people aren't thinking about is like, there is going to be a war with the cartels at some point. So maybe it's not even a civil war, but the idea, like something I've pressed people on is Saturn in Pisces is permeability of borders and walls. Saturn in Capricorn in the 60s was build the Berlin Wall. Saturn in Capricorn in the late 80s was take down the Berlin Wall. Saturn in Capricorn from 2018 was Donald Trump saying build the wall, build the wall, build the wall. Saturn in Aquarius was the social, like ideological wall between people where people couldn't see, like we're on different, ideological sides. Saturn in Pisces is permeable walls. This is where Saturn in Aries is going to be hard stop. We've got to completely stop this at this moment. I don't think you're going to see immigrants flooding the states like they were. And I would see more of like, I wouldn't even be surprised if there's some sort of war around the border. Because again, the military industrial complex, this is why they're like saying, Israel's bombing, Gaza. So now America has to go invade Iran. Like they will just jump to conclusions to get to the point that they want to make. And in the war hysteria, that's how it's going to go. My thing is,
I'm not sure, right? Like, so the fact that the cartels, the fact that the cartels are making a lot of money, bringing millions of people through America's southern border from China, from all over the planet, right, means that the CIA itself is taking a cut of, like, they're aware of this plan and have tacitly approved one way or the other, via a cut, and so are banks like HSBC, which means there is a level of the Anglo-American power structure that wants these millions of people in the United States. So I do think like if we go to like if we do the DeSantis thing of like let's go to war with Mexico over this, which will be as disastrous as all of America's modern wars. I do think it's going to lead to conflict, but we're in a weird situation where it's like we have to find out why at a top of the CIA, top of like Anglo-American financial institution level, they would want 5+ million new new people inside the US, and none of those answers are good, and that ends in conflict 100%. But like none of when you game that out, there's no scenario where it's like, oh, because they're really nice and they want to help people. It's definitely not that one.
My answer is it's just the tech surveillance state. That's the only reason that would make sense to me, is to create a situation in which everyone has their digital passport, everyone has their digital ID. You're okay with the police state, with the surveillance state of cameras being everywhere. I don't know if you understand anything about social impact. Have you gotten into that at all? Oh my God, that's the thing I keep telling people about, and I'm like, we're like in 10 years. You can't even trust like the circumstances of why you're crossing the street, or like what you see around, because that could be all, hedge fund investments betting against you or for you, or what actions that you take. But that's what I see there. Coming back to the election thing is Kamala Harris has some major big career stuff happening next year. Biden also, he's one of my favorite examples of, he is someone who is like objectively successful with a horrible chart. His chart sucks. It is so bad. And some people are like, oh, I have a bad chart, I can't live. I'm like, you don't have to say like Joe Biden's a great person, but like he has a really tough chart, and he's had quite a tough life too. I mean, like whether he loves his son and he's the fairest with him, but like it's just like, I can't imagine being the president and then your son's like this, meth head guy that like is fucking his like other son's, widowed wife, which is the most American thing ever. But
did you watch Fall of the House of Usher yet?
No.
On Netflix is really good. Anyway, it's one of those like ultra rich American family morality tales of like the level of venality and corruption. It's really good. Anyway.
Yeah. So when I think of Hunter Biden, I think of all of like the rich friends I had when I was growing up. It's like, that's exactly what their lives were like. It was like they were just doing the most absolute crazy things with no one doing anything about it. But anyway, I see Kamala Harris somehow getting into power. And I don't know if that means she's going to win the next election, or if they're just going to bring in Gavin Newsom, because Gavin Newsom also has some things coming up. I don't think DeSantis is going anywhere. I would love, boy, is it getting harder to like RFK Jr. as of late. But he's really testing, my will. I just want clean water and, no experimental ejections. And, but he's not going to get elected. It's just not going to happen. And the thing is,
like I was talking to Greg Carlwood about this. It's like as America's current political configuration comes to an end, you have this archetypal, literal Camelot arrival of the perfect Democrat. And that's what I was saying before, because all of his positions are what a Democrat should be. And his background is what a Democrat should be. And it was the same thing with the Israel stuff. I'm like, oh, come on, man, you're fucking killing me. And then I realized actually the Democrats are shit on Israel too. So it still fits the idea of, here is Saruman as he should have been. Like here is what an actual good Democratic candidate should be like, and he's so utterly rejected and threatened, literally threatened with death. Like, no, you don't get any security, all this kind of stuff, and it's just a testament to where America is in its own story, in its own cycle. That like the Democratic Party is so dysfunctional that you have a King Arthur candidate, and they're doing everything they can to stop it. It's incredible. And now he's left the party. It's like, yeah, anyway.
Well, and I think too, if it's going to be Trump and Biden, or Trump and literally whatever Democratic candidate, I think Trump would win. But if he's going to be in prison, they can just say, oh, it doesn't matter, so we're just going to bring whoever we want in. So I don't think this election genuinely matters, because it doesn't, Trump could win by 80%. It could be like a Ronald Reagan type takeover. Doesn't matter.
Interestingly, the Socrates has a Republican win at 61% of the vote for next year, which is unheard of, because one of the dysfunctions of democracy is it's a 51%, 49 generally the whole time. So you have one half of the country or population oppressing the other, and then it switches, right? It's dysfunctional, but that's generally what happens. So 61% of the vote win is an absolute landslide at the level of federal politics. But it's also not going to the same thing, not as much, but it happened in the last election. And the model says like it's showing a Republican win, but it's also showing a high degree of corruption and no one believing the results. And it's even worse this time around. So it's like a
So
bigger
worse this
Republican
year.
win, but like because we have a scenario for 2024 where a former game show host wins a landslide presidential election from prison. But
It's
next year's gonna be fucking wild.
I will say, whoever's made that saying up, "May you live in interesting times." Boy,
Yeah,
I don't think I'm not bored. That's for sure. It's just it doesn't matter. And again, Trump has some huge stuff going on April of 2025. Like he enters his zodiacal releasing like L1 peak period, like which is like in his chart, it's like zodiac releasing is like when is the climaxes of your life. For him, his like if you think of a mountain range, there's multiple peaks, but there's one that's the tallest. He hits his highest peak on his mountain range in his lifetime, April of 25. So we're not done with him. Something happens with him. And again, that might even look like, I think a lot about like maybe like even Al Capone, where like Al Capone was like known for going to prison, and like the almost like the other stuff is almost in the background, where I wonder if like Donald Trump going to prison makes it that big thing, or if, you know, whatever ends up happening after that. But the next election is not, it's just one of those things where it just doesn't matter. And especially it doesn't matter now that like, you know, RFK isn't getting security detail. The Democrats aren't going to let him on the bill, so he has to go independent. It's like, yeah, okay, that's clearly not happening.
this is coming back to white pilling the apocalypse. From an anarchist perspective, none of the presidential elections, but this last one and this one has especially never mattered. And why that's a white pill is everyone just switch it off. Just ignore it. Just stay the fuck away from it. It doesn't matter. It is a highly corrupt zoo of a political establishment spiraling to, I promise you, it's guaranteed death sometime this decade. Like, it all comes down anyway. Like, there's no point arguing over which airline meal you want as the plane is coming down. It's like, that just release that as a thing you don't need to care about. Just blow it away.
Well, and that's the thing too, where it's like, even if like, let's say Trump won and that somehow worked out, it's like, well, I would at least be more open-minded as to what could happen. Meaning, like, the only thing I appreciate about Donald Trump is he's just him. And the establishment doesn't like that. It's like a child that won't listen to the parent. And that doesn't mean the parent's still not going to get their way. But if they have this child that is like kind of in control of like in the driver's seat here, like there could be more obstacles. There could be more pause. And again, I wonder how much, you know, the Russia-Ukraine thing would change, or if China would invade Taiwan. I don't know what that would look like. But I think, I mean, most of the American sentiment is no one really cares who wins. Just make inflation go away, stop the wars. Exactly. And there's the part of us that like RFK, they're like, please give us clean drinking water and stop putting Monsanto in charge of our foods.
It's not that difficult.
But this is where, again, where I come back to World War III, it's like, I don't think it's going to look like it has over the past few times. They're going to be very hot and quick wars because we just have the technology for that. It's not like, you know, some people are like, you know, Peter Zion, which I there's a lot I listen to Peter Zion, but he's always like, Russia's going to try to take over the USSR again. It's just like, that's not going to happen at whatsoever. It's not like Germany's taking over all of Europe. It's this like, it's like a married couple who hasn't talked about any of their problems, but it's the whole world. And like, we have to like come up with these, like, we have to bash it out before we can come to like resolutions on what things can work and what don't work. And I think a lot of that is, you know, Western democracies trying to like, you know, take over the world, as well as globalism. There's been all these fraught issues with that and working that out through some sort of conflict. But again, you know, I was just listening to someone say like the Civil War wasn't called the Civil War until after like almost it was done. Like it was called like the Southern Rebellion, and then it was called like, you know, like state something like that, and then it was called the Civil War. That, I mean,
isn't it still called the War of Northern Aggression in the South? Like, doesn't it, you know, have all these? Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. Like it's a brand in that sense. But my concern, I had this with the pandemic situation, where looking at the model of when the people hear, oh, it's not really going to be World War III, and think, oh, it's fine then. And I want to go. I'm actually generally, this is a white pilling the apocalypse show, but the trouble is, and it comes back to what you were saying earlier about Westerners not having the context really for true calamity and true hardship, because there hasn't been even, and I don't mean to dismiss people growing up poor or any of that kind of stuff. Like even if you grew up in poverty, you're still, that's that liberal thing of like, well, you also had a smartphone, and so there were things you had that made you richer than Louis XIV. And I'm not going to make that argument, but what I mean is like, no. There's growing up in hardship in America in the 90s, and there's the world unraveling, right? So my concern is when people hear, I don't want it to be, it's not really going to be, World War III is not going to be like World War II. It's like, oh, well, I'll be fine then. It's like, no, I want you to onboard the forecast and come back to that live for 100 years, die tomorrow idea of like, well, now I need to move into the meaning, because I don't want people thinking like, oh, well, then if there's not going to be trench warfare in northern France, everything will be fine. It's like, yeah, that's the bit where I like people here, they're waiting to hear the good news, because it's like the refined carbohydrate or the refined sugar of like, oh, it's not going to be like World War II. It's sweet. I'll carry on.
No, well, and the way I look at it is like, as a young man like me, if let's say you're a young man between 21 and 35, when you get a letter in your mailbox or on the door that says you've been drafted for the war, what decision will you make? Are you going to die for whatever the military industrial complex just wants you to go die in Syria or in Ukraine or in Taiwan for whatever reason? I think the thing to take serious is this election may not matter, but what is happening is American politics are unraveling. And what that means is people need to wake up to that and start thinking, what does the future look like? What does the future look like when the election does matter? At what point do you make a decision? Is it, like at what point do you make a decision of like, maybe I don't want to live in DC or New York City. Maybe I want to have more control over my food if the supply chain is going to be all militarized and taken away from you. What does it mean that I just have a silly job that means nothing and that doesn't pay me enough to live anyway? Because guess what? No job is going to fucking pay for that except if you work for Lockheed Martin or Raytheon. What reality is it going to take for you to start actually thinking about that? In what way do you want to set your life up? And what I mean by it's not going to look the same is that, again, it's not going to be trench warfare and, what it's going to be is it's going to be a lot more intense and hot and quick. Like rather than World War II is this slow rise to this big crescendo, it's going to be like this boom, nothing, boom, nothing, boom, nothing.
Yeah, that's absolutely. It'll go. And so the weird thing, I was thinking, sitting with this of late. Now, I'm a big fan. I don't know if you listen to Unregistered with Thaddeus Russell, but I've read his history, like his American history books, and he's very big on like the true causes of the previous world wars and cynical but correct readings of American and British implication and involvement in it and so on. Be all of that as it may. The other thing that's different, because I want to come back to the draft, because that is showing up in my forecasts as something that America at least has to deal with. And that's one of the reasons for the open border, by the way. But
yep. Wow.
Last time around, we were kind of the good guys in the sense that it took and this is Thaddeus Russell's stuff, and he's a former Columbia historian of American history. It took the political establishment a lot of skullduggery to get the American population, who had in the 19th century historically been very isolationist and utterly disinterested for all the right reasons in European wars. Just like, fuck off, do your own thing, right? Which is the correct attitude.
Yes.
Now, by the time of World War II, there was a broad sense of this is the correct war for America to be in. Like the Pearl Harbor skullduggery helped with that. But in general, it's like we are the good, which made things like drafts easier. Now, when it came to Vietnam and Korea and the draft and so on, there was still this idea, enough Americans liked America to go along with that. But the very idea when you get that letter /email/ping in your TikTok inbox to say you've been drafted by fucking President Kamala Harris to fucking die in Ukraine, you're not like, when we look at the civil unrest model, like who is saying yes to that? Like what? Everyone's talking about, which is true. It's the same for any Western country. Like Americans are too fat. They're too unfit. You
Well,
can't
it's like I
actually
think it's like
draft.
80% of Gen Zs don't meet the health requirements to actually be enlisted. Which again, when you brought up the whole that's the reason for the open borders, like boy, that
Five
just clicked
million,
something.
5 million skinny legends from Central and South
all
America.
all military age men. How convenient.
But that's what it's for. That's why Merkel did it as well.
Well, and so
The other year.
my thing is like and there's a different sentiment around the draft, you know. So I was talking to my uncle about this. My uncle, he was a biker guy, and I have a crazy step grandpa who was like crazy Vietnam War vet, just absolute picturesque of it. In fact, I have his bayonet from the Vietnam War. It's like one of my favorite relics I have. It's sick. Anyway, my grandpa, that was my actual grandpa, he dodged the draft. He thought it was bullshit. But my uncle, I was talking to him about this a couple years ago. He was like, yeah, I'm not a pussy. I just took my draft card in it. And he said it was like taking LSD in Vietnam, which just also sounds like, boy, the 70s and 60s were wild. People don't understand, though. Ask every Iraq veteran. And now that we have left Afghanistan, ask every Afghanistan veteran. Were those wars bullshit or not? 99% of them are going to say that was a complete waste of my life, especially Afghanistan. The more that I understand that, it's like the American military was genuinely trying, at least the soldiers there, not maybe in complex, but these soldiers were trying to help, you know, the Afghanistan people build their own democracy. And then the way that we pulled out made 20 years worth of work completely meaningless. And it changed everyone's tune on it. When you get drafted, are you going to go? Or is it, for me, and you know, maybe this is controversial to say, but like I'm a Yankee at heart. My forefathers, my ancestors were on the Mayflower, and on my mom's side, they were here since like the 1600s. I believe it is an American duty to reject any war at this point. It is.
That's a good.
It is. I believe it is a sign of a traitor to be drafted into the war. And it's one thing when you need the money, and that is a job. It's a job. Like, I can't blame you, but to be drafted and listen, and you to take that is absolute, in my opinion, it's just being a traitor. And this is what comes into the American situation right now. Is right now it's all falling apart, but you need to pay attention to the falling apart and understand that's going to happen, to say what replaces this. It's the same problem with the whole Israel-Palestine thing. No one has got a plan for when they destroy Gaza. What happens after that? So they don't have a plan. They don't know exactly what to do. So when you see all of this happening, it's like, okay, well, what does it mean when I do get drafted and it is real? What does it mean when my food, also the inflation goes up another 100%, and like I can't feed myself without, you know, it's like Venezuelan where it's like there's just money out on the streets because it's too much. What does it mean then? What actions do you take then? Is it still like, and again, this is where I think social media and the internet make it way different, where there is a possibility to still live a lifestyle, to still be successful, to still be in a protection, you know, in a protective space, and successful and thrive through life. But it's not as simple as you can just wake up and do whatever you want. It's like you have to be completely aware of what the situation is, and given the context of where you live, how you live, and what are your goals for life. Because if you're just planning on stepping up the corporate ladder, it's not going to be easy. If you're, you know, going to be unemployed and you'll take that draft card just so you can get, you know, employed, do you really want to do that? Is your life worth what are they going to pay in the Army? $50,000 and possibly getting, you know, some sort of, you know, 7.62 bullet in your skull, or what? And so I just think we're at this point, and you'll see it after this election and after, you know, the spring of 2025, of people going like, what does this actually mean? And that's where my white pill is, I believe you should still live a life in which there is opportunity and success and for things to thrive, but it's not going to look the way that you might think. And I think the best way to do it is own your own business. It doesn't matter what it is. It could be selling cupcakes. It could be making TikToks. It could be, you know, having a farm, but it's not going to look like, you know, working in a corporate job, doing whatever. That's not going to be it. And this is where I get white pilled about Pluto and Aquarius, the democratization of everything. We're not going to have to rely, and this isn't necessarily Pluto Aquarius, it's the triplicity shift, where the triplicity in the earth signs was corporate consolidated, you know, structures versus everything in the air sign. These are all the people signs, Aquarius, Gemini, Libra. It's all about the people. And so there is a much greater opportunity now to take advantage of that now. And again, maybe you won't make $10-20 million, but you'll probably make enough money to be able to pay your bills if you understand that you are in the very rare part of human history where you can take control over your life completely. This is the only time in history you can do it, especially in a Western world. Maybe not in Australia, but at least here in America.
It's going to look different by the end of Pluto and Aquarius, as we both know anyway. So it's like 10, 20 million watt at that point.
Well,
But
I don't know if we make it to Pluto out of Aquarius. My timeline for the absolute apocalypse is 2036, but that's where I think like the poles would flip. And I know I like that video you sent. I like that video you sent me. That made me think, oh, okay, cool. That's not going to happen. But look at the astrology of 2036, and you might go, it's really symbolic of the sun going dark and mass amounts of people dying.
That might even be a bit earlier in an Armstrong model, but it's one of those things that's like, look, we can look at our forecasts and go, this is what I, in my heart of hearts, believe at the moment. This is my risk analysis, and I'm going to adjust and thrive accordingly. And there are just some things like, no, I can't. Like, that's not a thing that I can plan for in any meaningful way, in the same way I can plan for the rollout of digital currency control systems and World War III and all the rest of it. But coming back to you're looking at, in particular, 2025 Q1-ish, but beginning the end of next year. And that, coming back to that upswell idea, because I want to finish on, I actually went back before we started recording this and watched the episode with Dan Waits and S.J. Anderson, the update on the Barbault Basket, because what's really struck me is what you just said. Like the bad stuff that's going on is also the invitation to say what's coming next and how to position around it. Because what he said, and I want to leave aside, like everyone, when they talk about Andre Barbault, say the astrologer who predicted the pandemic, which low-key annoys me. He picked 2020, but there was no rise in all-cause mortality in 2020. So when I look at it from like, it was a calamitous year, to say the least. But anyway, that's beside the point. But he has a model that I like, which is quite rhythmic. So it's to do with for people who are unaware, to do with the proximity and the distance of the outer planets. And it's like a breathing pattern. It's another cycle, right? And so that's one of the things he was looking at. And he's got July of 2026. And funnily enough, because your name is Cam White, when I was watching this episode, S.J. Anderson picked 10th of July as the chart to use, which is my little brother Cameron's birthday.
Oh.
So, yeah. So 10th of July.
Of 26?
And I'm talking to Cam White, and like, this is a sync. I'm going to bring that up.
You said of 2026?
10th of July, 2020. Oh, his birth year. God, I can't remember. 85? Is that 88?
No,
88.
I meant whatever cycle.
Oh, the Barbault Basket is July 10, 2026 is what S.J. Anderson picked. Yeah. And so it's a story of the outer five planets. And Andre Barbault said it is the best astrology of the century. And a couple of things that Dan read out on that episode, which I will have linked up below. What began in 2020 is resolved in 2026. And so he started to see the positive side of that. For me, that is when I think we're going to, a way of understanding that is the combination passport currency control system complete. Right?
Yeah.
Because if we look at uplifting humanity into a global utopia, like the new world civilization is taking off here, the entry into the second quarter of the century bears the stamp of the achievement of a new age of humanity, where the promotion of the lower strata of the population and the victory of the underprivileged, solidarity without precedent. And the solidarity is the French trigger word. Like, okay, cool. He was French, so it's not like a burn, but I can see why someone who has a positive view of French socialism would look at these planets and go, this is going to be great. And in fact, parts of it will be, but it also, when we look at if it's resolving 2020, what we're seeing there is, well, one thing we could be seeing there, the shadow side of that is scaling up the CBDCs into the back end of all the CBDCs are being built the same because the plan is for it to run globally. We all know that, right? That, and by then they would have sorted out the digital passport situation. So there's something about the Barbault Basket which can look to French eyes like free money and connectedness and so on, which is true. But it's true in a way that I think is going to be a little bit unpleasant. And that's the funny thing about, like, oh God, he's going to be right about this in a way that I'm not going to agree with, if that makes sense. Do you know what I mean?
No, I agree. And like, It's one of those things where there's a lot to like. I kind of want to pull it up on here, but oh shit,
go
hold
for
on.
it.
Let me see if I could do this, and then let's see if I can do
I
this.
wonder if
It's gonna be backwards, yeah. Because for whatever reason my screen slipped. But if you look, like, yes, Jupiter. This is so funny. It's all backwards. Jupiter's gonna be in Leo. It's gonna trine Saturn in Aries. We like that. Pluto, Neptune, Uranus, all making these sextiles and trines. We like that. That looks good on the surface. But the whole thing with astrology is, okay, like the age of Aquarius. That's what everyone's been saying. Oh, it's all this Aquarius stuff. It's going to be good. But what has happened? We went to a complete tech dystopian lockdown. You were forced to your mandated fascist inoculations, and good luck living through it for the next decade. Like, you have to put it into context. And sure, I could look at the astrology in 100 years from now and say, it looks fucking bitchin'. But I don't know the context. Are we going to have robots that then gain consciousness and want to create a civil war to, kill human beings so that they can rise to power? That's what that might could look like. I don't know. I look at this and I just look at everything is going to continue the way that it's always continued. Like, there was not a major event besides COVID, which changed the trajectory, but it changed the trajectory of the way that they wanted to go. Like, there's so much momentum happening there that it will take a lot more for that to cease. What I look at 2026 is, again, we just so happen to have your digital passports now. We have, the predictive policing, the social impact stuff is starting to get rolled out with Uranus and Gemini. And we have this new fun, again, Uranus and Gemini is always like crazy new technology too. Some new way of communicating that is then going to, you have to think the people who are in control of those things aren't looking out for you. They're not saying, yes, let's create a utopia for everyone to thrive in. It's the exact opposite.
So new way of communicating is important, right? Because I shared a Matt Taibbi video on a show the other week where he's looking at Klaus Schwab talking in French about we're moving into a new age of transparency, which is how they're rebranding total surveillance. Because what he means by transparency is for you to be monitored and at all times, right? And he's trying to brand that as transparency so that we don't react to it. But that's a new way of communicating. So everyone talks about, I remember when I had media jobs in London, talking about this era and smart devices and the Internet of Things. And it'd be like, imagine getting a text message from your fridge to say you're out of milk and you can go and get it. Which the other side of that is, imagine a fridge that knows if you have animal protein in there that you're not allowed to have. People don't get what.
Well, you don't have anything to hide, though, right, Gordon? You have nothing to hide.
Well, that's everyone, because obviously we're, although funnily enough, because of my microbiome, I'm basically fucking raw vegan at the moment. But I fundamentally disagree with the eat the bugs trajectory of when it comes to humans and protein. I think animal protein is essential for most people, not all, but many people. Anyway, the point is that that's coming under attack, and everyone thinks, oh, cool, I'll just get to know my farmer and buy direct from them. And great, please do that anyway. But if you have a fridge that can identify if your milk is out of date or that you need to buy more spring onions, it can also tell if you have contraband cow. That's the
well, and this is where
transparency is wild.
This is where I take kind of an extreme opinion on that. Is the American government committed genocide against the Native Americans by giving Americans money for killing every buffalo. That is how we committed genocide. That is documented history. Do you want to know the astrology of that? Saturn in Aquarius, squaring nice. Pluto and Neptune in Taurus. When does that happen again? Around the 2050s is when we get Saturn in Aquarius squaring Neptune in Taurus. This idea that they're taking away meat to kill people. I genuinely believe people need animal meat to live. It's the most nutritious thing ever, and we've been doing it for literally millions of years. And we have a historical precedent for the government weaponizing meat against a society to commit genocide. It's hard for me to not see that it was done once. Why not do it again? And also, I was just listening to, I told you about the uneducated economist guy. I don't know if you still listen to him.
Because of you, I love him. He's great.
Oh, he's great. He talked the other day about how it's not just that they're they want you to eat bugs, it's that they're taking away investment from cows and pigs and putting it into protein, into bug protein. And when that capital investment leaves chickens and pigs and cows, that means it's not going to be as profitable or easy to even do those things. So it comes down to oh, they don't just want you to eat bugs. The economic circumstances might say bugs is what you have. That is what you will eat. And so I think people that even if like you're a vegan and you don't think we should kill animals, it's like, well, look at the Native Americans. Like we literally killed all the buffalo to commit genocide against them. And that's documented history right there. Why you may not like the cows and stuff like that, or us, what we do to the cows, but like, it's just a part of life. And that is one thing, in my opinion, that should absolutely be talked about more and more well, again, this is why I think what's cool about the future and things like, because like I'm looking at buying like property in like rural Colorado. I can buy Starlink. I can buy land that will be somewhat expensive because, just how it goes. I can build a shack for really cheap, live off the land, and still have access to all of the world's information, all of the world's speech. And again, I think, I could still be an astrologer on YouTube. I can still do music. I can still do all these things. So many people can build businesses without having to rely on the old way of doing things, which is living in the city, getting a college degree, all of that kind of good stuff. And again, this is where I get white pilled, where it's like all of this stuff is going to happen, but we could have let the British just say, oh, we're going to tax your tea and we're still going to own you. But Americans said, fuck that. We're going to do our own thing. And what's really interesting about the history of America is that there wasn't really an American identity until that War of 1812, where the British came back in, for Electric Boogaloo 2, and, destroyed the White House. And when we kicked their ass, that was like when American national identity was actually really formed. And I see a very similar situation happening right now. Like a lot of people, and I look at this as more of a stateside thing. A lot of people keep talking about the Pluto return of America. But what people don't understand is America as a federal government is a conglomeration of states. I would argue 90% of states have Pluto in Aquarius. And where I think there's going to be more of a national divorce situation is saying, I'm going to disentangle myself from the federal government and maybe stop listening to the federal government, which is also too what people don't understand about this last Civil War is it took 20 years for the Civil War to actually formally begin. It began by being like, well, there's like the 3/5 compromise and the, Mason-Dixon line. And there was a bunch of fighting for 20 years until it actually blew up into that. And so I think what we're going to start seeing slowly is more and more states segregating themselves, or at least just not listening to the federal government.
Well, that's already in play. If you look at southern states declaring emergencies around the border because Washington isn't, and Florida sending support to states that are on the border like Texas for that. All the things that a functioning federal government should be doing is an indication that, it's more of that underlying thing that comes next is, if you can see it, it's arriving now, right? And that's coming back to the basket, is the context in which your fridge will rat you out to Bill and Klaus for having too much cow in it, right? Is also a world where you can do the things that you're talking about. So that was really funny, like looking at the Barbault Basket, which again, he does say is like the best astrology of the century, but it was the beginning, not so much the beginning, but it was the best upcycle of his kind of cycle model. So 2026, I think, is going to be a unpleasant year objectively to be in a body for. I don't think it's going to be a fun time, particularly on the planet. There's certainly been worse, but that's just what it is. However, I do see in the basket, I see why he got, like, why it's a French view on what we consider to be dystopia, but he's also not wrong, because actually some of the stuff that we're talking about is in play. And coming back to white pilling the apocalypse to land the plane here, is these changes are not right or wrong. They are just happening. And and it's the astrology. Astrology is kind of like a bunch of things, but almost like sailing or hang gliding. So it's picking the right current. And if we see that this transformation is happening, it's going to bring digital passports, at least temporarily, because the system can't hold, but like some sort of currency controlled digital passport system, it's going to do that. But in order to be able to do that, it can facilitate millions of individualistic flourishings. And so that's like how you white pill the apocalypse is not to say, and coming back to my wanting to smack people's fingers when they said, oh, so the COVID thing's over, we'll be back to normal. It's like, no, smack your fingers. That's not the takeaway. The takeaway is you can do good things at the same time as bad things are going on, because they're powered by the same transformation or change. So that's what I thought the basket was so fucking funny. It's like the ultimate French read on, and in his defense, like it was a while ago, like it was before you could kind of look and go, oh shit, it turns out they're all planning the same digital currency, blah, 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 right? But it was just really like, it's one of those funny predictions that's very much a glass half full, but not exactly wrong.
Well, and the thing is too, like during COVID, for some people, that was some of the best times of their life. They got to sit down and reevaluate what was important to them. They quit their shitty job. They left the shitty relationship. They got to sit at home and stay with family and stuff like that. And so the way I look at this is like we've talked about the whole digital currency and the, one world government stuff. That's all going to be at play. Where I would be able to see more of an increase is like, this might level the playing field in terms of things moving forward. Now that I'm actually looking at this chart, my only thing that I also don't like is right after in 2026, we will have the North Node start transiting over Pluto and Aquarius, which is like, you will eat the bugs, you will take the digital passport. There is no choice. We're all the same. I don't know if I know you're like a Gen X, so I don't know if you're familiar with the Fairly Odd Parents TV show.
Early millennial.
Millennial. Yeah. Okay. Do you know the Fairly Odd Parents TV show?
No.
Okay, well, your younger millennial, early Gen Z would know it. There's an episode where everyone's a gray blob, and you have to be a gray blob, and if you're not a gray blob, you're weird, and they exile you. And that's how I look at a lot of the Pluto and Aquarius stuff. It's like, we're all the same, we're all genderless, and we're all have zero opinions, except we all agree on the same things. I see a lot of that happening, but at the same time, especially here if you live in America, there's so many opportunities where you don't have to live in that system. And for example, we live in a world where if the internet wasn't around, it wouldn't be the same. But I think the internet and technology is going to level the playing field in a way that it hasn't been able to be leveled before, where they might want to do more of this. But again, for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. And like you said, that's not going to be sustainable. They're not going to be able to do all that. It will fall apart. And for the people that are untangling themselves from a situation in which they are forced to live on it, or at least for people that can have a choice in how they operate and things, that's going to be the ideal. And again, like you said, it's kind of just a waiting out period and seeing where things go after that. But where I think, again, more of the white pill is like, you have a choice in all of this. You do not have to lay flat on your back and, be drafted to go die for, Zelensky or, for Netanyahu or for, Taiwan or whatever. Like, we all have a choice in this. And it's like, I love the idea of voting with your dollars. What are you spending your money putting towards? What are you spending your time thinking about? And again, while you should be aware that the world is not going to be the same as it was or has been, and we're going into a new era in which we do not know what is to expect, you can still understand the reality of the situation while still living your life and getting true to what is actually valuable and meaningful for you. Again, what is your heart of hearts calling you to do? And act upon every single one of those instances, because you're probably not the only one that wants to act on those. And it takes someone it's like one of those things where I always think about, there's like a video of this guy at a concert where he just jumps out and he starts doing this really crazy dancing. And everyone's kind of looking at him weird. And then some other person comes in and starts crazy dancing with him. And then before you know it, everyone starts going around this guy and crazy dancing with him. It's like, it sometimes takes that one person to make that step forward to get everybody else on board. And so, like, it's just the idea of the apocalypse being this all the way bad, all the way horrible thing. I think for one, it depends on where you live. Places like, and I think everyone's going to get their own taste, right? We talked about that when you were on my show the last time. Like, there will be people's own taste, but there is a situation in which you could still thrive and you could still live the life that you want. But let's actually get real down into it. What do you really want out of your life? What do you really value? What is burning in your heart to do before you die? And should you make the choices to live that now, or would you rather repress those and act as if everything's fine?
Yeah. Well, that's a very good question to leave people with, to pose and ponder. Well, so it was a really good chat for people who want to know more and find your work and follow along with what you got going on. Lay it on them. Where do they find you?
YouTube, Cam White Astro. Instagram, Cam White Astro. TikTok, Cam White Astro. I was very against TikTok, but now I'm learning I can't be a boomer about it. I gotta get on the TikTok stuff, and it's also a lot more fun. But yeah, mostly I do a weekly horoscope, mostly all personal development focused. I do a podcast that's very on and off, just depending on when I want to talk about something. The Delineation also on my YouTube, but both my weekly astrology report and the Delineation are both available on Spotify and iTunes at just Cam White.
Nice one. All right. Well, good to chat. Good to thrash all of this out. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Gordon.